Week 10 is officially upon us, and today I got you guys covered with my top 36 wide receivers. I bring you guys in the tier list format every single week, going through my wide receiver 1s, my wide receiver 2s, my wide receiver 3s, and my favorite flex plays entering Week 10 of fantasy football. But before we get into the official rankings, as always, we go through the Will They Play tier. And the guys on the Will They Play tier this week are Deebo Samuel, Nico Collins, Brian Thomas Jr., and Amari Cooper. Before we quickly get into them, of course, if you do have Chris Olave, Mike Evans, Keon Coleman, and Michael Pittman, they are ruled out for this game. And of course, I'm sure you guys are setting your lineups if you're watching us, but monitor the fact that the Seahawks, the Packers, the Raiders, and the Cleveland Browns are your bye week teams in Week 10. But we go straight towards Deebo Samuel. He is still battling what's being described as hip and oblique injuries. He's been limited in practice all week. It does sound like he will play. Again, Deepak over on Twitter gives him about a 2/3 chance of playing in this game. So if you do have Deebo, again, I do expect him in the lineup, and he would be a top 10 wide receiver for me. But of course, monitor his status given the questionable tag entering the game. Next up, Nico Collins, wide receiver of the Houston Texans. He had his 21-day IR practice window open this week, and we did see him return to practice in limited capacity on Friday. As we know, he's been battling this hamstring injury placed on IR. It's still a true question as to whether he will actually be activated on Sunday night. So if you do have Nico Collins, again, he's too good of a player to just sit out of your lineup. So if you have Nico Collins, make sure you have guys like, Demarcus Robinson or Raheem Mostert or anybody that's going on Sunday and Monday Night Football, because if Nico plays, he's in your lineup. Unfortunately, if he is listed out in this game, you would need a pivot option, and I do think Nico is worth waiting for. We go from Nico Collins to Nico Collins Jr. because the next up is Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's still listed as questionable with the chest injury he sustained 2 weeks ago, and he played through the same injury last week. If he does play, top 20 level wide receiver, and judging from the sounds of it, it does look like he is intending to suit up. And then finally, Amari Cooper of the Buffalo Bills. He's still being impacted by that wrist injury that held him out last week, and it is being described as a true questionable on what's being reported right now. He's a top 30 level play if he does suit up, but make sure you monitor his status and have a pivot option in case he doesn't go. We already know Keon Coleman's going to be out of the lineup. If Amari is also out, Shakir would be a big riser for me this week. But now we go on to the official top 12 wide receivers, and headlining this list at number 1 overall, we have Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. He is currently the wide receiver 2 in fantasy, and now gets a matchup on the road against Jacksonville, 25 implied Vikings points, and as I'll describe, we absolutely love this smash game environment for Jefferson. And the Jacksonville Jaguars are arguably the single worst defense in the NFL in a game, like I said, where Minnesota is implied for a ton of points on the road. Jefferson has been remarkable this year. He's the wide receiver 2 in fantasy, and it's come on the fact that he hasn't really had that 30+, 35+ Jamar Chase Thursday Night Football level performance yet. But I do think it could be on deck this week. Like I said, the Jaguars have no hope on covering this guy on the outside. With Minnesota in a tight division race between them, the Packers, and the Detroit Lions, I expect them to feature their alpha number 1 wide receiver in this smash spot of a matchup. So with Justin Jefferson, again, I don't have to explain too much. Obviously, we know he's arguably the best wide receiver talent maybe we've ever seen in the NFL. But I do think this is the potential ceiling spot. 30+, 35+ point performance on deck for him. And of course, my wide receiver 2 on the slate actually played on Thursday Night Football. Poor one out for me. I actually had to go against this guy in both my home league and in the flock league. But if you're watching Thursday Night Football, I mean, it was the Jamar Chase show. And I'll also group in Zay Flowers, who I ranked in at 12 here. I mean, these players are on different spectrums after the game. Like we saw, obviously, Jamar Chase, 17 targets, 11 receptions, 264 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. Very reminiscent of that game he had in his rookie year in Week 17 against the Chiefs that probably won a ton of people their championships. So Jamar Chase, again, he was my 2 coming into the week, and maybe I got to reevaluate and have this guy as the 1 moving forward. Whereas on the flip side with Baltimore, Zay Flowers, a little bit of an underwhelming performance with 6 targets in this game, 4 receptions, and 34 receiving yards, only 7.4 PPR points. Again, this was a smash matchup going up against a struggling Cincinnati defense coming off a big-time performance the week before. I don't think anybody could have foreseen this letdown that was Zay Flowers this week. So again, pour one out if you had Zay Flowers, and especially if you were going up against Jamar Chase this week. Number 3 is Malik Neighbors of the New York Giants, 23.5 implied Giants points playing in London against the Panthers this week. If you have Malik Neighbors, you'll know exactly what he's represented coming off of that concussion. He's been that secure volume wide receiver, but he just simply hasn't had that big breakout week we saw between weeks 2 and 4 prior to his concussion. However, I mean, he has a 37% yearly target share. He's gone over 30% in terms of the targets in each game since his first game in the NFL. And like I said, we know what the ceiling represents for Neighbors. In that 3-game stretch between weeks 2 and 4 prior to getting hurt, he scored 20 plus PPR points in each of those 3 games. Now, of course, gets Carolina, high implied total like I mentioned with the Giants. This is probably the highest implied total we will see for the Giants this year. So if there's going to be a week where we see Malik Neighbors 25 plus, 30 plus PPR points since he's returned from the concussion, it's going to be this week against the Panthers. Just make sure you're up in time to watch that London game because it's not the first time we mentioned a player from that atmosphere. My wide receiver 4 is Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, going to play the Arizona Cardinals on the road this week, 24 implied Jets points. And Garrett Wilson was already a wide receiver 1 prior to Davante Adams coming over, but since the Davante Adams deal, he has truly transcended into high-end wide receiver 1 territory. And as you can see from our buddy Ron here, since the Davante Adams deal, 19.8 PPR points, which is the wide receiver 4 across that stretch, a 27.3% target share. So not quite at the 29.3 he was operating at pre-Davante Adams coming over. But if you're telling me you can go from a 29% target share to a 27% target share and get higher value looks with Davante Adams on the field, I will take that trade-off every single time. As you can also see, his yards per route run going from 1.63 to 2.59. Massive leap with Davante Adams on the field. And I think for the most part, it's increased, like I said, the overall value of the targets he's getting in this offense. And with Davante Adams handling cornerback 1-level matchups, we have seen Garrett Wilson be completely unleashed. And I think going forward, we need to be treating Garrett Wilson as a top 12 to 15 fantasy football asset. Number 5 is Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions, 26.25 implied Lions points. Already kind of glistened over the matchup there when I talked about Nico Collins, but I mean, if Nico Collins suits up especially, this is going to be a high-profile matchup. But even if he doesn't suit up like we just talked about, the Lions are projected to score points in this game. With Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's had nearly identical peripherals to last year, but his overall production has noticeably gone down. And the main reason for that is that Detroit simply has not been throwing the football like they were last year, like we've seen all year. Detroit has been so handily up on teams, they are leaning on that ground attack. We saw last year the Detroit Lions average 35.9 pass attempts per game, but this year they have been one of the lowest passing volume offenses in the league, only 27.4 passing attempts per game. So despite maintaining those peripherals that led him to be a top 5 wide receiver in points per game last year, he's really been impacted by the overall volume of Detroit. Again, this is a get-right spot. This is a competitive game environment. Even without Nico Collins on the field, I think the Texans will give them a fight. With that being said, I do think it caps Amon-Ra's weekly ceiling, knowing that because his team doesn't throw the ball like Jefferson, like Chase, like those other offenses do, he simply will not have the opportunity to be a guy that can have a 56-point performance like Chase on Thursday night. And then next up, we have wide receivers 6 and 11 respectively. A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles coming in at 6. My beloved CeeDee Lamb coming in at 11 for me. 25.5 implied Eagles points. 18 implied Cowboys points in this game. And we'll start off with A.J. Brown. I mean, he's been an alpha all year. In his 4 full games he's played, he's averaged 19.9 PPR points per game. And this is a very advantageous matchup going up against an extremely banged up Dallas Cowboys defense. Vegas loves the Eagles offense projecting this week. So there's really no concern for A.J. Brown. He did leave last game early with a knee injury, but he's not even on the injury report going into this game. So if you have A.J. Brown, high-end wide receiver 1 expectations. And speaking of high-end wide receiver 1 expectations, that's where we would have CeeDee Lamb if not for the Dak Prescott injury. Dak Prescott, if you guys are unfamiliar, was placed on IR, is dealing with a torn hamstring at this current point, which really makes the projection for CeeDee Lamb murky entering this week. Again, the offensive game environment for CeeDee Lamb decreases dramatically without Dak on the field. But as we do know, he's a high-level alpha target earner. Since week 4, he's averaged 21 PPR points per game. And we still know, despite no Dak Prescott, because the Cowboys can't run the football because they struggle up front, we will expect a pass-heavy game plan from Cooper Rush and co. So really, again, we will see a lot as to how the Cowboys offense functions this week. But with that being said, I think Lamb goes from a high-end, if not the wide receiver 1 overall expectation, to a guy I would be viewing as a low-end wide receiver 1 for the time being until we see the sample size with Cooper Rush under center. Next on up, we have the Monday Night Football game environment, and 3 guys fill in here with Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and Tyreek Hill, respectively coming in at 7, 8, and 12 for me this week. As we know, the Rams are 1-point home favorites in this game, and I really do love this game environment as a whole. As we know, it's the 3rd highest over-under the slate with the 3rd highest projected pace. And starting off with these Rams wide receivers, again, whether you want to argue Puka ahead of Kupp or Kupp ahead of Puka, we know what they represent. When Matthew Stafford's on the field, when they're operating in this Sean McVay Rams offense, both are elite, top-end wide receiver 1 caliber players in fantasy football. Again, argue between yourselves who you'd prefer. They are 7 and 8 respectively for me. I would slightly lean Cooper Kupp based off what we've seen this year, but again, it is truly a coin flip as to who will outproduce who. And on the Tyreek Hill front, he was actually a late addition to the injury report as I'm reporting this. He is reportedly dealing with a wrist injury and was late added on Friday. So again, if you have Hill, monitor his status. Again, he should be in the will they play section, but this was released as I was about to record. So if you do have Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 12 level expectation if he does suit up in this game. But of course, he's too good to sit. You can't go into this weekend expecting him not to be in your team. So if you do have Tyreek Hill, like I said, make sure you do have a pivot option on Monday night, whether that's a guy like Demarcus Robinson, who I'll talk about in a bit, or a guy like Raheem Mostert, who I talked about on yesterday's video. But then we move to wide receiver 10 and closing out my wide receiver 1s this week with Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons, 25 implied Falcons points on the road. And while he did exit week 9 against Dallas with a hip injury, it is expected he will be ready to go over on Sunday. Again, great spot going up against a Saints defense that just traded their cornerback 1 with Marshawn Lattimore. And London has scored 18.1 PPR points per game between weeks 2 and 8. He's a steady wide receiver 1 projection, and he commanded 12 targets in his last matchup against the Saints, even when they had Marshawn Lattimore on the field. Continue to start these guys like I mentioned at the top, so let's waste no more time and let's go through the wide receivers 13 and 36. However, one plug before we get into that, if you guys want all of our rankings moving forward, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, you can get access to our full weekly rankings manifesto with one of 2 ways right now. First way, go over to Underdog Fantasy. If you use promo code FSC, sign up and first deposit at least $10. You make one play on the site, and you will get access to our weekly rankings manifesto. The other way is by going over to flockfantasy.com. Promo code FSC will get you 30% off any site-wide package, as well as a 7-day free trial on the site. Again, the most valuable resource is our weekly rankings manifesto. Make sure you get access to it now, especially as we're going into the playoff weeks. But now let's get into wide receiver 13 with Davante Adams of the New York Jets. And I just mentioned how he has handled cornerback 1 matchups on the outside. Fortunately for him, Arizona doesn't really have anybody on the perimeter that can defend Davante Adams one-on-one. And as we saw this past week, he has an evident ceiling in this offense. If the offense is clicking like it did against Houston, if Davante Adams is as involved as he was against Houston, we could be seeing both him and Garrett Wilson be top 15 level wide receivers moving forward. Over 22 PPR points, that natural chemistry he has with Aaron Rodgers. And on top of that, this is a very consolidated target hierarchy between him and Wilson. So both of them are smashes, especially against this struggling Arizona defense. 14 is Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. In 6 of his 7 games this year, he's gone over 14 PPR points. Now has a smash spot, like I mentioned with A.J. Brown, going up against this injured Cowboys defense. Deron Bland is out yet again, and Trayvon Diggs has not looked like that same cornerback coming off of his torn ACL. With Devontae Smith, he's averaged 15.2 PPR points per game this year, and he's historically destroyed my Cowboys. Trust me, I would know this one. 15 is Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons. I already talked about his teammate with Drake London, but Darnell Mooney needs his flowers, man. He has been a league winner in fantasy this year, and he has established himself as the clear-cut number 2 wide receiver for this high-octane Atlanta passing game. Currently the wide receiver 11 on the year with a 23% target share, and based on what we've been seeing as of late, there are no signs of that slowing down. I'm trusting this Falcons passing game, and I'm trusting Darnell Mooney as a wide receiver 2 for me. Next up, George Pickens and Terry McLaurin, respectively, going up in that big matchup. Steelers taking on the Washington Commanders in Washington this week. We'll start off with George Pickens. He's been an alpha this year, and with Russ under center, we're finally starting to see those valuable targets come to fruition. I mean, he was a failed toe tap away from another big game in Week 8, and this type of usage Pickens has been getting, met with good volume from Russell Wilson, makes it so that Pickens has the opportunity to smash going forward. On the flip side, with Terry McLaurin, he's already been crushing this year. I mean, since Week 3, he's been a top 20 wide receiver in fantasy football each week. I do give some respect to Joey Porter Jr. It is a tough matchup on the outside. I just simply have to give him his flowers. Again, he's still tethered to a great situation, even regardless of a tough shadow matchup against Joey. And then at 18, we have Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. This is, of course, a very good game environment on Sunday Night Football. Pass funnel Lions defense. And Tank Dell has played a lot better football in his last few weeks. Again, it is reported coming into the week that he was dealing with an injury, but it does sound like he is expected to play. With that being said, whether Nico Collins is on the field or not, if Nico Collins is off the field, I expect a ton of volume for Dell with no digs in the receiver room. If Nico Collins is back, however, I think that gets supplemented like Garrett Wilson, where it's a higher value passing offense, adding an alpha like Nico Collins back. Moving on to the low-end wide receiver 2s, we have Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts, 21.75 implied Colts points hosting the Buffalo Bills this week. And I mentioned last week as the smash bot for Downs going up against the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday Night Football. And while he had a solid but unspectacular game, I really truly think the crush week may just so happen this week. We have seen Downs be an absolute target monster since returning in week 3, a 27% target share on the year. And with Michael Pittman ruled out for this game, we could very well see a 32, 34, 35% target share from Downs going up against Buffalo this week. High scoring game environment, double-digit score in all but 2 games since returning, and he's established himself as a consistent wide receiver 2 in fantasy. On top of that, with Joe Flacco under center for the rest of the year, I think Downs, like Pickens, has the opportunity to crush moving forward. Speaking of guys that can crush, DeAndre Hopkins was absolutely phenomenal against the Bucs last week. 8 catches, 86 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. And he operated that same role against Tampa that we saw Rashee Rice and Juju absolutely excel in. With DeAndre Hopkins, as he keeps developing rapport with Patrick Mahomes, he could very well be a league winner. Again, the reason why he's wide receiver 20 for me at this point is he is expected to face shadow matchup from Pat Surtain. But if he goes out there, has another big-time performance, 18+, 20+ PPR points, we can even make the case he should be a top 12 to 15 wide receiver rest of the season. 21 is Ladd McConkey of the LA Chargers hosting the Tennessee Titans, 22.75 implied points, and he has a 24% yearly target share. The Chargers have increased their pass rate after the bye to make McConkey a viable wide receiver 2 in fantasy. Each week since the bye, they've thrown the ball over 30 times and now face an extreme pass funnel defense with the Titans. The Titans, outside of 2 games against Malik Willis and Tyler Huntley, have been the #1 team in pass rate over expectation for their opponents. They can stop the run really well, have been more susceptible to the air. And with the Chargers on the flip side, their ground game has actually gotten worse in these last few weeks. And in their 5 games before last week, J.K. Dobbins was averaging under 4 yards per carry. So if they're forced to throw the football, if Herbert's throwing the ball, 30, 35, maybe 38 times in this game against, like I said, that pass funnel Titans defense, we could really see Ladd McConkey have a strong showing, just like he did 2 weeks ago when he was a week winner. 22 is Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills, and this ranking is with hesitance. I don't know if Amari Cooper's going to play. However, if Amari Cooper is listed out for this game, you could very well make the case that he should be higher. Great smash game environment going up against the Colts, over 25 implied Bills points. And as we know with Shakir, he has really established himself as that true middle of the field target for Allen, a guy that's playing like a top 3 overall MVP candidate right now. But moving on to 23, we have Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. Like I mentioned, on the flip side of that Jets-Cardinals matchup. And I really struggle where to rank Marvin Harrison Jr. On the one side, you can argue this is too high. He's projected to go against Pat Surtain. 22.5 implied points at home is good, but not great. And Marv himself just simply has not looked like that player we expected coming into the season. However, I can't drop him further than this. The target share that he's getting, the route percentage that he's getting, on top of knowing the implied talent that he has, again, I'm willing to get burned by Marv. Do I have expectations like I did coming into the year that he'd be a weekly wide receiver 1? Absolutely fucking not. However, as we've seen this year, he has legitimate spike week potential and he has the talent to turn it around. As we know with rookie wide receivers, they tend to scale up at the end of the years, and hopefully that is the case for Marvin Harrison Jr. If he has another down performance and he simply does not look like that player I expected, you could be talking about a guy that's a fringe top 30 wide receiver moving forward. And then finally, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears ranks at 24, and he's a very similar case to Marv in the sense that we know what the ceiling represents, but he just simply has not been a consistent piece on a week-to-week basis. On top of that, he has a projected shadow matchup against Christian Gonzalez, and he has quietly lost work to Rome Odunze in these last couple of weeks. In the last 2 games, they are even at 13 targets. And like I just mentioned with Marv, as we tend to see with rookie wide receivers, they scale up after the bye. And with Rome Odunze, 2 weeks since the bye, like I said, evening DJ Moore in targets and overall outproducing him. Again, I still do prefer Moore based off the overall sample size we've seen this year, but I am very hesitant at this point. DJ Moore, he's got the schedule to turn it around. He's got the talent to turn it around. But I think there is a very real possibility, like I'll talk about in a second, for Rome Odunze to emerge as the Bears wide receiver 1 moving forward. Again, still trust Moore for the time being. They are still big-time home favorites with over 22 implied points, but it is something to monitor if Rome Odunze outplays him again. But moving on to the wide receiver 3s, we start off with Jauan Jennings at 25, and it's real simple to me. This is a prime matchup against Tampa Bay. I talked about the 49ers wide receivers on yesterday's video, and I do slightly lean Jennings over Pearsall, although I really do like Pearsall, like we'll discuss in a second, because we have seen Jennings have that evident, he scored over 46 PPR points in a week when he got consistent routes. We haven't seen him be a consistent route player across the year because of injuries, but when he has gotten his consistent routes, he's been an extremely productive player on this team. Again, I trust him slightly over Pearsall. I think Pearsall's got a safer floor, but I think Jennings has a weak winning level ceiling, especially in this matchup where big plays could come in a bunch going up against the struggling Bucs secondary. 26, Xavier Legette of the Carolina Panthers, another member of that London game going up against the New York Giants, and man, the usage for Legette has been phenomenal in these last 2 games. In the last 2 games, 21% target share and 25% target share. And more notably, he ran 93% of the routes this past week. If he's going to be becoming a full-time player, this is already a guy I was very excited about going into the NFL draft. He was my wide receiver 8. I thought there was immense upside with Legette to be, that baby DK, baby AJ Brown for this Carolina offense. And because they're using him so efficiently and he's getting this level of volume, I really do feel like he's a guy that can scale up moving forward. I have him at 26. He's been a top 30 wide receiver in the last 2 weeks, and I still don't think he's tapped his ceiling quite yet. Next up is Jalen Waddle coming in at 27 for me. The aforementioned game environment, Miami going up against the Rams. And my bold prediction this week is this could lead to many Monday night miracles. Waddle has been disappointing all year, even with Tua coming back. But I do think the process dictates a big game coming sooner rather than later. I'm ranking him at 27 with the assumption that Hill plays. However, if Hill is out and Waddle's in that wide receiver 1 role, you could even be talking about him as a top 15 wide receiver. 28 is Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. Again, I already mentioned the smash game spot environment with Justin Jefferson, but Jordan Addison really needed it. Jordan Addison is a guy that has not been a consistent target earner on this Vikings offense, and he's really been this boom-bust wide receiver all year. However, if there's a week for him to boom, it's going to be going up against Jacksonville, given the implied total of the Vikings, given the matchup on the outside, the attention that maybe Jefferson can receive. I can see Addison making a big play or 2 down the field and really supplementing a high ceiling. Like, as we'll talk about in a second, a guy like Demarcus Robinson, a guy like Jameson Williams. They don't have high floors, but if they do connect on a week, they can flat out win you a week on their own. And as I mentioned with DJ Moore, you guys should have expected Rome Odunze to be close behind. Obviously, the same game environment as DJ Moore. And the reason why I have Rome Odunze as high as I do is that when you look at the last 2 weeks, better ADOT, better air yard share, better end zone target share, and has outscored him in these last 2 games. Now, obviously, 2 games versus the early portion of the year, you still have to give the sample size to DJ Moore. But like I said, Caleb Williams, rookie quarterback, Rome Odunze, rookie quarterback, both top 10 overall draft picks. As we know, like I said, rookies get better after the bye. There's a real possibility these two connect and really smash down the stretch. I still think DJ Moore will be very good, and he's probably the odds-on favorite to be the number 1 overall wide receiver here. But at the same time, not acknowledging the possibility that Odunze can usurp him, I think is foolish. And then wide receiver 30 is Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. Low implied total at 17.25 road points going up against KC. Very tough matchup on the outside, but it's kind of weird how the narrative of Sutton has really flipped in a year. Operating with Russell Wilson, volatile deep threat on the outside, we saw his touchdown equity on display with Russ. Whereas with Bo Nix, we've really seen him develop as a true 3-level target earner, high-level volume earner on this team. And despite a tough matchup, if he's going to go out there and command a 24+% target share like he has all year, I'm still comfortable starting him with top 30 wide receiver level expectations. He's been a top 15 wide receiver in the last 2 weeks, so despite the tough matchup, I still have faith in Sutton producing. Moving on to the flex plays at 31, we have Demarcus Robinson of the LA Rams, a guy that I will most likely be relying upon in the Flock League this week. With Demarcus Robinson, I understand. Does he have a volatile, extremely low floor? Absolutely. However, what we know from Demarcus Robinson, he is more of a complementary wide receiver than he is a guy that you want as a top 2 wide receiver on your team. And that's been evidenced by his usage and overall production in the games that both Kupp and Nacua have been on the field. You guys can see this tweet, but in the games that Demarcus Robinson has played with those two on the field, he has been extremely productive. And on top of that, he has extreme touchdown equity in this offense. Defenses are focused. Don't let Puka beat us. Don't let Cooper Kupp beat us. And we have seen Demarcus Robinson average a touchdown per game in his last 8 games with both of them on the field. So again, risky, volatile, but we know Matthew Stafford trusts him both in end zone situations and operating at that third level of the field. 32 is Calvin Ridley, and he is almost the flip side of a guy like Demarcus Robinson. Demarcus Robinson, you're not really banking on the volume. You're banking on the game environment. You're banking on the quarterback play. You're banking on the Sean McVay factor for this Rams offense. Calvin Ridley's the inverse, where you're banking on the volume and not much else. Because as we see, less than 16 implied points for this Titans offense against a Chargers defense that has allowed less than 13 points per game defensively this year. With Calvin Ridley, he has to get there on volume, but as we've seen across the year, it has been an extremely volatile predicament on a week-to-week basis. So with Ridley, again, hopefully off of the AC joint sprain, Will Levis is able to supplement his production, because otherwise I think we can see that week 3 to 7 stretch of Ridley where he was basically unusable in fantasy. Wide receiver 33 is Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions, double-digit PPR scorer in 4 of his 6 games before suspension, and now returns to a potential shootout environment against the Texans on Sunday night. Lions offense has operated extremely run-heavy without him. However, I do think adding their third-level threat, deep threat back, we could start seeing vertical shots being implemented back into this Lions game. And I think this is the theme of all these guys in this area, but he's volatile, but who isn't in this range? Wide receiver 34 is Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers, and if we had knowledge right now that Debo would be out, he would be a big-time riser in this game for me. However, with the knowledge that potentially Debo will play, that's why he ranks at 34. Smash game environment, high implied total for the Niners, and on top of that, he still also has implied upside that if Debo suited up and maybe left in the first or second quarter, he would have a high ceiling in that game. So really with Pearsall, especially in PPR formats, we know this team wants to use him. They want to showcase that first-round pick, and we saw that on display against the Cowboys prior to their bye week. So I'm really excited. Again, I prefer the Jennings ceiling because we've seen it this year, but we did see some really positive involvement from Pearsall in his first 2 games coming back from the shooting. And then finally, Wan'Dale Robinson and Demario Douglas, I just grouped together here at 35 and 36 because I think they have very similar cases. Because they're both, those 2 small, short area wide receivers. Wan'Dale has the better matchup and better overall implied total with 23.5 for the Giants this week, whereas with Demario Douglas, we have seen more consistent volume in these last couple of weeks. However, the reason why I do slightly prefer Wan'Dale, you can't argue with 23.5 implied points versus 16.25, so although I really do like Demario Douglas, although I really do believe in this Patriots offense, I do think the process is trusting Wan'Dale over Demario in this spot. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. Like I mentioned in the middle of the video, if you want access to our rankings moving forward, there is one of 2 ways to access our weekly rankings manifesto. First way, Underdog Fantasy, promo code FSC. Sign up and first deposit at least $10. Make 1 play on the site, and you will get access to our rankings. The other way, FalkFantasy.com, promo code FSC. 30% off any site-wide package, as well as a 7-day free trial. But with that being said, peace out. Good luck in your matchups. Let's build momentum for that playoff run.